You're listening to episode 26 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Frequent contributor to the Facebook fan page for the Secular Buddhist podcast, Earl Frank Rectanus shares his experiences in starting one of the first secular Buddhist groups. Early Buddhism calls it the triple gem. Buddha, the example we have, demonstrating how this practice should be a part of one's life. Dhamma, the teaching itself, giving us the roadmap to follow that path, and something to talk about over frou-frou coffee on Thursday morning. Yes, this should become a national holiday. And Sangha, the community of fellow practitioners, friends, and sometimes challengers as we tread that path together. Secular Buddhism is no different. We're still human beings, social creatures who have evolved to interact and work together in groups. Yes, be an island unto yourself, only you can actually do the practice. But you're not alone in taking it on, struggling with letting go, so we can see things as they really are. And as such social creatures, we find comfort, energy, stability, and encouragement among our peers and kalyanamitas, our friends in the practice. Secular Buddhism is, relatively speaking, in the 2,500-year history of Buddhism, kinda new. We don't have a thriving and well-known presence yet. Interest is growing, it seems, as people begin to stretch either out of their comfort zone of having the structure of organized and established religious institutions, or as they discover others who already share their particular inclinations towards a more secular practice. And, I'm happy to say, we not only have things like, say, a podcast that supports and talks about this particular slice of the Buddhist pie. There's a growing and potential energy in the formation of local secular Buddhist groups for more in-person community support. Today we speak with Earl Frank Rectanus, a name familiar to those of you who read the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. Earl is a clinical health psychologist in practice on the southwest coast of Florida for 25 years. He has been reading about Buddhism since college and is a member of a secular Buddhist study and meditation group which has been meeting for the past 2.5 years. So, sit back, relax, and have a donut-flavored coffee. All it takes is coffee and a donut. And I'm here with Earl Frank Rectanus. Earl, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
For folks who are listening to the podcast, Earl has been a wonderful participant on the Facebook fan page for the Secular Buddhist podcast. And one of the things that he mentioned in one of our conversations is having a secular Buddhist group. So one of the things we're going to be talking about here is how that evolved. But what I'd like to start with, Earl, is what your background is and what led you to having a Buddhist practice.
Sure. Well, I'm probably a neophyte in Buddhism as compared to many of the people on your Facebook group. But I was exposed to it through Alan Watts as an undergraduate initially in some of my coursework. And then subsequently, John Kabat-Zinn is a clinical health psychologist, which is one of my tribe. And he's a pretty well-known Buddhist who does mindfulness meditation and has brought that into the mainstream of psychological practice. And so I've become aware of that. And then a few years ago, in Second Life, I became aware of a skeptical Buddhist Sangha there, which was based on bachelor's work, and participated in that for several months before finding a real-life group that met those same needs.
And just for people who are listening to the podcast, we do still have a skeptical a group out on Second Life where we do have talks. So again, I'll be linking to all this on the web page for the podcast, so be sure to take a look. So, continuing on to your story, was that reading that you found first? Did you then start doing any retreats or anything like that? Did you ever find a center?
No, nothing like that. It's all been primarily reading and meditation. Again, as a health psychologist, I've been trained in a wide variety of mind-body techniques that come out of the Western tradition. So the mindfulness meditation is very similar and very useful, and feeds into my practice in those ways as well. As do the Buddhist perceptions on the nature of reality and consciousness and illusion and suffering. All of these are very relevant and I think consistent with my professional practice, as well as what the neurosciences and other academically based processes are producing in the West.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you done any in your professional practice? Has there been any change in how you're approaching your activities with patients based on Buddhist practice, or has it always been kind of part of it with the mindfulness-based stress reduction and things like that?
I think it's very consistent, and so it's a convergent source of validation for these important ideas. I think they exist in really all traditions in one form or another, but the Buddhist one I think is very concise. And as you were mentioning with Batchelor yesterday, it is also nicely entrained with a process of practice, which is fairly specific. And so I think that does make it more apprehendable, more understandable than it sometimes is a general stress management approach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the things I'm going to quote you now, because you've said some really interesting things on the site. In one of our discussions, you had said, I think the danger of even non-theistic religion is the ease with which dogma, reference to authority, and suppression of unpopular views can impose orthodoxy and repress optimally creative dialogue and growth. I think there's a beautiful way to talk about that organizations themselves can be fraught with challenges that stifle creativity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think that's what you and Stephen were talking about yesterday a little bit in terms of how do secular Buddhists perhaps perceive themselves as a part of the broader Buddhist tradition. It seems almost as soon as we start identifying an institutional identity, we start getting into some of these challenges or illusions of identifying a self, identifying in this case an institutional self. What brought my secular Buddhist group together was the fact that the meditation group they had been participating in was becoming progressively more traditionally religious in a Buddhist sense, which was not compatible with their secular perspectives. And so they found themselves really needing to leave that in order to resonate with each other more deeply on these frequencies of secular awareness that are important to some of us. And I joined them at that point. So my experience has been exclusively really in a secular Buddhist Sangha rather than one that is in any sense religiously traditional. And our group is notable for having no hierarchy of authority. So, we rotate through each of us, and each of us brings our own readings, understandings, and share with the group and then lead meditations. So there's no institutional authority in our group, and it may be that that institutionalized authority which in some sense really defines truly religious undertakings.
Mm-hmm. So you guys trade off. You have that flat model we discussed several podcasts ago, that there was the guru-student model, very much a top-down, and then the flatter models that more modern groups are taking. And you're very much doing that in your trade-off of both who's leading that particular session and who's leading meditation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you're doing your talks, what kinds of books are you looking at? You mentioned you were doing more contemporary books?
Yes, I think probably exclusively contemporary books. I tend to bring things like Alan Watts or Stephen Batchelor. Other people bring Nick Tot Han and a wide variety of other current authors. Usually selecting those parts which are compatible with the group's secular nature. So we're probably selecting out a lot of those more religious elements that we don't really find conducive. My input tends to be more from the neuroscience tie-in, or what I see as being essentially the compatibilities between basic elemental Buddhist thought and the products of Western scientific examination of consciousness over the past 100 years.
Mm-hmm. So in the group that you have, it's about how many people do you have?
We have 5.
Okay.
It's a small group, consistent over the past 2.5 years.
Wow, that's excellent. That's a pretty good duration for a small group of people.
Yes, it is. And I guess that's one of the challenges of putting together a group of people who are genuinely compatible. I think that may be the challenge, especially of a secular Buddhist group, because we're really talking about what might be a very highly selected group of people to start with as compared to the general population in any geographic location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that Stephen Batchelor had mentioned in his podcast interview is that, and it's in his book, and I think it's in Confession of a Buddhist Atheist, that he's been accused of picking and choosing the parts of the practice that appeal and discarding others that don't. And his response to that was, this has always been so. That's mm-hmm. the normal evolution of anyone's practice. It's how we have Mahayana practice, and we have Zen, and we have Tibetan, is picking and choosing of what we want. And it sounds like it is an appropriate growth. There's, of course, always some risk that people say of, but then we're losing what the real teaching is. What do you think about that particular criticism?
Well, it sounds like it would be an anxiety about impermanence. So perhaps a lack of acceptance of impermanence. Things morph, change, and traditions will, of course, come and go and transform as they should, as they must. I'm a firm believer in evolutionary processes as basically defining how civilization proceeds. And as this evolution is occurring, many of these ideas will be kept and many will be lost. But I think there will be good reasons for that as it occurs. Yeah,
I think as it adapts to our particular cultural context, within our, what our modern views are, is that we're finding early Buddhism gels very nicely with that. And other kinds are maybe not as good a fit, and that's okay. They still have their own cultural basis and their own communities to continue. This is a new way of looking at it. When I say new, it's perhaps been occurring for over 100 years. We've had this resurgence in a modern view since colonialization in Sri Lanka. There's been a movement towards this. What do you see as some of the big challenges in the growing of this relatively new and different way of looking at Buddhist practice?
Sure. Well, I think it goes back to your last question, the fear that somehow traditional Buddhism will be lost. I think that the opposite is more likely to be the case, that it is really the more supernaturalist and traditional religious perspectives upon religion of all sorts that tend to be in the ascendancy at the present time, as people respond to the increasing complexity of globalization with a lot of anxiety and a need often to grasp even more firmly to existential foundations that they've been raised with. So I don't see any of the traditions, the traditional religions, as being at any great risk. I think really it's this kind of synthesis that is barely getting a toehold and will continue to struggle a bit, I think, in order to gain any sort of critical mass in that cultural dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree entirely that because it is early, there's, on the one hand, there's very fertile ground in that it hasn't been used yet, it hasn't been done yet, and people are hungry for perhaps this kind of evolutionary trend in the practice. But on the other hand, it is new, and there is a lot of other stuff already out there that can gobble it up in standard evolutionary terms. What do you think would be some ways to help grow this kind of practice?
Well, I think that community building is really what it's about. That is, because there might only be one person in 100, or one person more likely in 1,000 or 10,000 who would actually naturally gravitate to this kind of synthesis. It's important to create an environment which is nurturing, conducive, engaging, and reaffirming of that very special kind of search which such people are doing. So all of the things which are being done, I think, on the internet are very important. Well, what brings me here and what brings us to this conversation is my involvement on the internet. I was not an early adopter of the internet, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I've become, very avidly involved in it, and that brings people who are broadly separated by space and time and logistics together, and allows for people who share something of this specificity to make community with each other. And this is a really wonderful byproduct of modern technology. And at the same time, to take those opportunities to create community and then cultivate them and find ways to engage them in the real world as well.
Mm-hmm. I would agree entirely. And I'm, as a technologist, an IT person, I was a very early adopter of the internet, but I have come much later to the virtual communities, like Second Life, that people have set up, and the skeptical Buddhist community and the others that are available to people. We are now building community not geographically based. It's a wonderful opportunity that technology has enabled, is that we can build community that is interest based. And that in itself is going to just help foster and grow the ideological stances and views, positive or negative, depending on how we approach them. They're going to get that support. Whereas in, a couple hundred years ago, your community is the people who are within 20 miles of you. And those are the people that you're with, whatever they believe. Those are the people.
Right. Absolutely. And that, I think, continues to be for many people, many of the people that I've met in Second Life, going to the various groups I go to there, many times there are people who find themselves in geographic locations, in which the likelihood of bumping into like-minded people is very small. Even where I am, this 50 miles from here, we probably do have 1 million people, more or less. But that doesn't mean that they're really, it's that easy to put together geographically a group of people who are like-minded. And I do think that the group that I'm a member of, has been an enormously fortuitous happenstance. And so very difficult to define how that might, provide insight or foundation for somebody else to cultivate the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I've suggested to people who have either emailed from the website or they've commented on the Facebook that they don't have a community that is more secular in nature or more modern viewed in nature, that it's very traditional, and they've, as you've mentioned, not resonated so well with that particular form of practice. And I've suggested that they check out meetup.com, because there are groups that are out there, and if they don't find one in their particular area, that people consider starting one and creating a community that they may be surprised that there are a bunch of people just waiting for one to show up and attend. So that's
absolutely. Actually, I was just looking at meetup.com for the first time this morning as I was thinking about these topics, and became aware that there are 1 or 2 little groups I didn't know about that are actually in the area. So, I haven't by any means explored all the opportunities here locally.
Mm-hmm. that's the thing. I you check the boxes for what kinds of things you want to be notified by, and one of the the frustrations I have is that because I have checked a box on meditation, I also get things like healing touch seminars and homeopathy groups and things that are really quite disparate with my belief about how the world works. And
Right.
that there are such groups, that is fine. It's just frustrating to me that in our culture there still does tend to be that association of meditation with mysticism.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the things I really want to help change is that there can be very rational and valid uses that can be scientifically shown, and putting a little asterisk on that, we don't want to depend on if there's not a volume of studies saying exactly explicitly counts. We need to bear in mind that this is about releasing suffering and ending suffering. That's what the practice is about, and you don't have to have because I meditate, now my IQ has doubled. No, it's not that kind of thing.
Right, absolutely. Well, and I think really that people who are appropriate for mindfulness and meditation probably bump into it with some regularity by happenstance in the ambient intellectual culture. I think what you're running into, what I saw this morning too, actually, as I was looking at the meetup.com groups, was that indeed that primary dynamic of mysticism, or magic, if you will, supernaturalism, is somewhat dominant in the culture. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. There's people do as a group like magic and want magic, I think. So again, we're talking.
Magic is fun.
Absolutely. Well, the lure of quick and easy solutions, I think, is very attractive, and magical approaches or approaches that suggest enormous and mysterious power, I think, offer that to people. This kind of thing, secular Buddhism, is, I think, only going to be attractive to really a smaller demographic. And that's why using whatever mechanisms we have at our disposal to find each other is that much more important.
I think it is, and that's I've been speaking with friends who are very science-minded, and they have that strong association of, Buddhism, that's a religion, I don't like it, or, meditation, that's mysticism, I don't like it. I come back to, I'm science-minded as well, but you can have the best study in the world describing what chocolate tastes like. But eventually you're going to have to try some to see what it's actually like.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Well, I think people veer away often from meditation because it is challenging. This is one of the threads that we had in the last few days in your discussion with the Bachelor about whether meditation alone is a sufficient practice or whether it really does need to be involved with a canon of beliefs and values. I happen to think that meditation, seriously conducted and consistently practiced, is an enormously challenging thing. And that in order to do that, one does end up, I think, practicing the values. It's very difficult to divorce a consistent practice of meditation from, I think, an awareness of these other attributes of that system.
So the idea there, and I hear you, and I would agree completely that meditation is very challenging. I think that's one reason many people don't take it up, because it's hard to do. It's hard to find the time, particularly in a busy household life. And your thought is that just doing that, once you do have a regular meditation practice, that the effects of that kind of lead you into what the overall practice is saying anyway.
Yes. Well, it's the difference between thinking and doing. It's like if you can do something elegantly or skillfully, I guess is the Buddhist term, then I think thinking tends to come along more naturally than the other way around. I think we've all known or seen in ourselves or others the example of somebody who can think with great complexity about important issues, but who isn't able to follow through with those insights behaviorally. Right. And I think meditation is where the rubber meets the road. That's where you can either accept the moment and be in the moment or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a very elegant way to put it, that we do know people, and raising a hand, having been the kind of person who approaches things with a very complex mental way, but not so good about putting it into practice. I've done that many, many times, still continue to, and happily the practice is helping me get away from that. But we do have experiences where people, it presents to me, where I've noticed it most, is folks who are very attached to their intellectual capacity and have trouble kind of getting rid of themselves out of that and giving a valid listen to others, and a compassionate dialogue doesn't tend to happen because that practice, actually doing it, isn't there.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. Well, I think we enjoy the stimulation of intellectual debate, and that primal part of our nature often comes out in attempting to win debates, even about issues of this sort. And meditation is that releasing of that, I think, aggressive tendency or that anxiety which is constantly compelling us to be productive or to do something, and which allows us to sit in simple awareness, which I think is just extraordinarily difficult for people across the board, regardless of their background or tendencies otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Just having a life makes it challenging.
Right. Well, the illusion, the constant illusions of necessity which assault us, all the things on my to-do list today, which I have a tendency to think of as necessary when they aren't. I could start the day with meditation and no one would die and everything would trundle along, if not the same, then probably better.
So where would you like to see, what are your thoughts about, it's 20 years from now and maybe this kind of practice has grown some. How do you see that taking effect? What would that look like? What would you like to see?
What I'd like to see is, of course, a vibrant and nurturing community of people who are able to explore, both online as well as in our organic lives, in our communities, so that we can gather together and provide that ritual of human support, which has really always been a part of human communities up until the last 50 or 60 years in the first world. It's really about putting something back, which we've lost. Especially to some degree, I think, secularists. There was an interesting thing on the commentary on one of the sites on Facebook with your group. Somebody was talking about spellcraft, and you responded to that, and that was fascinating to me, because I do see modern secularists as sometimes dismissing the extraordinary power and importance of the subconscious dimensions of nurturing communities. In defining science consciously, we are not also defining the powerful foundations of art and symbolism and metaphor, which are so powerfully tied to our emotional being. And to some degree, it is we who are in the scientific and secular domain who will have to find a bridge to those sorts of essentially neurologic responses in order to provide something to our brothers and sisters more broadly that they're already finding in these other traditions.
I agree, and for folks who are interested in that conversation thread that is on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page, the discussion on episode 22, Losing My Religion, is where you can find that. It's active and still going. I was just reading through it this morning. So please do come out and take a look, because it is interesting that it isn't just a Buddhist growth that we're seeing. This is happening in other practices as well, whether it's paganism or Christianity or even Islam is going through some struggles in how it copes with modern society. And how that grows is we're living in interesting times, hopefully not in a Chinese curse sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Earl, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up that you'd like to talk about?
I think that your conversation with Stephen Batchelor yesterday was wonderful. I enjoyed that, and I think that bringing such good synopsis of the complexity of Buddhist thought to people like myself who are laymen and who will never devote the degree of specific study to this that people like you do, or certainly Batchelor, is an enormous benefit to me, and I thank you for that. And the website and the group and the SL group that I was a member of and still am, these are wonderful things, and I think they create enormous good works, even if we don't have huge current cultural impact that we're aware of. It doesn't mean that there's not actually huge cultural impact. It's just that we may not be aware of it.
Yeah, that reminds me of the religious landscape survey, and I'll link to this on the page for this episode, that had the largest growing religion that was growing faster than the others, just percentage-wise, were people who were designating themselves as having no religion. And there was some backlash about, they don't mean atheists, 'cause that would be bad. They don't mean atheists. Well, actually, many do mean atheists.
Yes, right.
That would include secular practices like this. That it's okay to be a secular person and still have what I would term a spiritual practice. I don't mean spiritual in the Casper sense. I keep saying that. I mean it in the personal development sense, in a way that makes me be a better person in my interactions with others. I think that kind of development, we could use the bhavana, development, to indicate that, but there are many secular people who are a little more willing to be open about it. And in our society, of course, we're not a Buddhist culture in the West. It's you're already a little bit different as a Buddhist. And a secular Buddhist, then you're kind of out on the Buddhist community as well. So I think you're right that having community is one of the important things we need to work on.
And I think we need new words. I think we're going to have to develop new words. Like you said, the spiritual word is a thorny and a difficult one. I love the term secular Buddhist, actually, because it's sort of like a koan, it's like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? What is it to be an unreligious, have an unreligious religion? It's very elegant. I think it's great, and I think that is the dialectic which will define important progressions in the future.
I agree. And Earl, thanks so much for being here. It's been a wonderful conversation.
It's been fun, Ted. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.